Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about how to tell when you don't need a framework. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hello Frederick, I keep on hearing from others how they all made the mistake of jumping into a JavaScript framework and not learning enough of the fundamentals on and how they really regret making that move. I don't want to make the same mistake. How can you tell when you reach the point where you are strong enough in your fundamentals in order to jump into a framework? Well, try to build whatever you want to build without a framework. It's that simple. I have an old video series where I show you how to build an SPA, which is a little bit more ambitious, I think, than what would be considered normal. And it's really just a proof of concept type of thing where I kind of show you that it's possible to build an SPA fairly easily. It's just not as clean and nice, and you sort of have to know a few things in order to understand what the trade-off is with doing it in all vanilla JavaScript. And I wouldn't, as I even state in that series, don't do this for any serious projects, because you can do it. It's not that it can't be done, and it will work if you know what you're doing, but it's really stupid to do it. And the reason being because the framework will help you allow lesser developers or people who have or more junior or things like that. You get a lot of stuff for free. It's the same thing. I remember I got there was a comment on another video I made, which was like how to create a vanilla JavaScript application or something like that. And the person kind of mocked me and said that, oh, it's fun to see that people think that Express, because in that video I use Express, that they think that Express is not a framework. And the person, of course, seems to have missed the fact that I've never claimed to not use a framework on the server such as Express, because the focus was to show you how to do it on the front end. Basically the entire video is about showing you how to server-side, like standard server-side rendering, not the SSR stuff that React does or things like that. It's really just the good old days where you used a server-side language such as, say, PHP, and then jQuery widgets on the front end, and that's the norm if you're not using any framework. And because that's the thing, right, guys, you have to understand that we did JavaScript way before SPAs such as Angular and React and stuff like that. I was actually I was taking my first steps as a web developer when jQuery widgets were at their peak, and Angular was just 1.0 or 0. Something. It was like really just coming along. So I was very lucky because I was one of those people who I got into the industry right before the switch. So I got everything pretty much for free, and I still have a leg back in the old days when I still had to use jQuery because the browsers couldn't agree on a standard for fetching a damn element. But it's really, as I was saying, it's really not so much that, in my opinion at the very least, the people who say that they regret not making that move and so forth, it's for me, I find that so odd, because it's really down to you. I mean, it was not like when I started using, say, Angular, which was my first SPA framework, that I was a master of JavaScript. I wasn't. I could have never rebuilt an entire SPA by hand in like vanilla JavaScript in those days, but now I can. And I don't really use vanilla Java, as you mean pure JavaScript, for doing that sort of stuff, because, as I said, it doesn't make any sense. For a large scale project, there's no reason to use a framework. That's the point of a framework, such as, say, Express, which is like arguably the biggest reason why Node took off in the first place, apart from, I mean, as a tooling runtime or something like that, because the framework is designed to help you take care of the plumbing. It's basically a way for you to create a blueprint for consistent results. And as I said, you can do the exact same thing, practically all of it, in vanilla JavaScript. But why would you? Apart from, in this case, because you want to learn how to do it, and that's fine. And then, as I said, then it's really down to just doing that thing. All you have to do is to try to make the same applications without a framework. It's honest to God, it is that simple. And you will start to very quickly find out, you will learn a lot of stuff which is useful, but you will also start to figure out why we sort of went to SPAs. But at the same time, I hope you will get to one very key realization. And that, my friend, is that there are two very distinct types of web applications, and people have forgotten about the old one, which is, in my opinion, usually the one that makes the most amount of sense, and that is how we used to use jQuery widgets. And I think that there are was it Astro, or like one of the up and coming frameworks, because there's one every week, right, who is actually going back to that way of thinking, where they've realized, and it's the same damn thing, right? We get so clever that we forget that there are actually situations when an SPA is not a useful thing. And for the average web page, you will find my videos where I say this exact thing. I personally believe that using an SPA for every situation is just stupid, because an SPA is fundamentally a worse experience in terms of performance and development and so forth than having a simple server-side rendered application. But you still need some JavaScript, because certain things on the page might be dynamic, and that's what jQuery widgets, that's what they were all about. You had a piece of a page that needed to be dynamic, and then someone had the idea to make more and more stuff dynamic until you have a full-blown SPA. And that's, in my opinion, an SPA should be used for a certain type of application, and you should use the tried and true methods of just having widgets and server-side rendered HTML for the other situation. Now, there are, of course, SPA frameworks these days, and solutions such as Next.js and so forth that kind of gives you both, but I hope you understand my thinking. Like there is actually still a fairly strong use case for using just vanilla JavaScript or using the older ways of doing things. It's just as I said, that it's unfortunately the situation where we sort of left it. Honest to God, we sort of left it behind, and it's more down. Honestly, I think it's more down to branding than anything else. It's sort of like Java or similar sorts of things, where the only reason why it took, more or less, why it took over in the way that it did, just as Angular and React and so forth, is because you have gigantic super corporations who convince the world that it's a good thing, and then everybody gets on the bandwagon, and you forget that things used to be a lot simpler. So what I want you to take away from this is that if you want to know if you're good enough to jump into a framework, it's actually as simple as try to build something sophisticated without a framework. That comes down to that. If you know how to build a SPA, which, as I said, I don't think that you need to go that far. That video series that I made was really just for fun, just to kind of prove to you that the components are actually not that it's not that complicated to know how to dynamically create an entire page. If there are many ways of doing it, in that one I think I just use like event dispatchers and a very basic self-made implementation of Flux, and those patterns, once you understand those patterns, and a self-made router as well that takes care of the page routes and so forth, which is based on the same concept that at least Angular uses. When you start to understand like sort of how the components work in order to do the thing that they do, making a basic implementation is not that complicated. But as I said, it's not really you don't really have a reason to do it because somebody else has already done it. And understanding those sorts of low-level details, it's like kind of pushing it. But understanding how to make a web page or website without a framework, when you start to understand when it's a good idea to just add a JavaScript piece to a mostly server-side rendered application. That's something that is useful in my opinion, and that's sort of the way it used to be before SPAs, because I mean, making an SPA, as I said, without a framework doesn't really make sense, but knowing how we used to do widgets, that's actually a very useful thing. At least that's what I think. Have a great day.